Chapter 2 Occult Foundations of Science. No amount of schooling can preserve modern civilization if man's appreciation for the higher values of life is destroyed by materialism. Learning has been turned from its ancient course and threatens to lose the name of action. Metaphysics, the first and most glorious of the sciences, has fallen into bad repute in evil times. The mentors of the Golden Age were men of heroic vision and high purpose. Now fat endowments from the bourgeoisie and smug professorships distributed among the conservatives breed the commonplace. Learning is eclipsed by a schooling which too often is but bondage to opinion and serfdom to authority. Rejoicing in their pseudo-enlightenment, the intelligentsia of today, like the Pharisees of old, give thanks that they are not as other men. The altars of an ancient learning, built to gentle spirits, have crumbled in the dust. Transcendentalism has given place to materialism, the worship of Lares and Penates to the adoration of the great god Doubt. Even flame-belching Baal was never served by a priesthood more fanatic than now grovels before the altars of mechanistic realism. Although nature abounds in principles which may be adapted to mechanical purposes, nature herself is not mechanical. The world is not a machine, nor was it spontaneously produced. It is an organism, not an organization. The universe is life escaping into manifestation through generation. Consciousness and intelligence are growing up through matter like tiny plants breaking through the dark earth. Among the drawings left by the great Leonardo da Vinci is one in which he compares the heart and the vessels branching from it to a sprouting seed, and Boheme compares the human soul to a seedling growing upward through the material nature of man in quest of light. The wise man will not forget the alchemical axiom that art may complement nature but must never violate her edicts. To venerate realities is to be wise. To recognize the simple dignity of divine procedure is to establish the mind in essential truth. The first instructors of humanity, the hierophants of the elder rites, those of whom it is written that they gazed upon the gods unafraid, transmitted to succeeding ages those doctrines which have proved necessary to the survival of the human soul. Fabian, the founder of the mysteries of the Phoenicians, concealed the secrets of generation under the figure of the world egg, and upon the authority of Sanchoniathon, prepared fables and allegories relating thereto, so profound in their substance, so magnificent in their daring, and so ennobling in their application, that for many ages they excited the astonishment and admiration of mortals. Modern educators, if accused of promulgating an economic theory, would vigorously protest that their first concern was to fit youth for life. The only kind of life for which they fit youth, however, is utterly lacking in perspective. The value sense is bankrupt at the very start. Modern learning has for its chief aim the perpetuation of the social order. Ancient learning, on the other hand, sought the perfection of the individual. In our efforts to make the world fit for man, we have neglected to make man fit for the world. Aesthetics may be regarded as incidental by the realist, yet knowledge had its beginnings among those peoples enriched by highly developed metaphysical systems, as the Hindus, Chinese, Egyptians, and Greeks. It was to the hierophants of the old mysteries that the splendid vision of a reasonable universe was revealed. The initiated priests were the first scientists, adepts in an ageless wisdom. These divine men set for themselves the task of dissecting the body of God. These first sages, to whom we are indebted for the fundamentals of science, found spirituality and idealism neither detrimental to learning nor incompatible with the premises of scientific thought. These fathers of learning practiced secret rites, communed with spirits, and were not above pondering the words of oracles. A far cry indeed from the hoary patriarchs of elder days to the pompous professors of this enlightened age. Many a tuck in Plato's ample toga would be necessary to make it fit the sciolist of today. Embodiment of the virtues and personification of dignity and grace, Pythagoras was a prodigy of erudition. The matchless quality of his mind lifted him far above comparison. His intellect rose like a blazing sun upon the horizon of learning, its far-flung rays illumining every corner of the world. It is exceedingly difficult to summarize his achievements, so great is their diversity. He excelled in mathematics, astronomy, music, and healing. He was a profound geometrician. At least two of the important theorems accredited to Euclid, including the universally known 47th proposition, were actually devised by Pythagoras, according to Diogenes Laertius. Pythagoras is the first person who is known to have taught the spherical figure of the earth, and that we have antipodes, and he propagated the doctrine that the earth is a planet, and that the sun is the center round which the earth and other planets move, now known by the name of the Copernican system. For details, consult Bailey's Histoire de l'Astronomie. His discovery of the harmonic ratios and the law of octaves in music is described by Iamblichus and Nicomachus, Boeotus, Macrobius, and others. He also divided the diatonic from the chromatic and enharmonic scales, thus earning for himself a chief place in the world of music. He practiced suggestive therapeutics and healed also with music, charms, colors, herbs, and poultices. He was able to cure not only the diseases of the body, but also the intemperances of the soul. He wrote considerably on herbs, and is said to have prepared a complete volume concerning the medical properties of the sea onion, a work mentioned by Pliny. Let us see how the good name of this glorious thinker has been traduced by critics unworthy to loose his sandals. It is difficult to imagine anything more instructive than the contrast presented to us by the character and system of action of Pythagoras, on the one hand, and those of the great inquirers of the last 2 centuries, for example, Bacon, Newton, and Locke, on the other. Pythagoras probably does not yield to any one of these in the evidence of true intellectual greatness. His discoveries of various propositions in geometry, of the earth as a planet, and of the solar system as now universally recognized, clearly stamp him a genius of the highest order. Yet this man, thus enlightened and philanthropical, established his system of proceeding upon narrow and exclusive principles, and conducted it by methods of artifice, quackery, and delusion. See William Godwin. When this author further states that delusion and falsehood were main features of his instruction, he takes it for granted that all claims to supernatural power made by or for Pythagoras were false, and that the sage of Samos was a mere charlatan and pretender. It is the old story. Mystics must be epileptics, and saints neurotics. Pythagoras suffered from a divinity complex. Socrates was a degenerate. St. Paul was subject to fits. Paracelsus was a quack, and for God, in the spirit of Laplace, there is no need for that hypothesis. Pythagoras, moreover, believed in reincarnation. He had a golden thigh bone. He tamed a wild bear so that it became a vegetarian, caused an eagle to stop in its flight and descend upon his hand, was seen in 2 places at once, declared that he had visited the underworld, and taught his disciples astrology. Ergo, he is the worst of knaves, a liar from the beginning. At least, these are the conclusions of very wise men who, knowing absolutely nothing about any of the things they judge, are, therefore, peculiarly qualified to pass final judgment upon them. It is sometimes easier to deny a man's existence than to attempt an explanation of his life. Consider the embarrassing case of Numa Pompilius, second king of Rome, who ascended the throne after Romulus had been taken up to heaven in a cloud of light. Numa has the distinction of being the mythological character who established the cultural system of Rome, and although non-existent, left several important books which are referred to and quoted by subsequent Latin writers. Numa Pompilius gave himself over entirely to mysticism and esoteric philosophy and, having renounced the ambitions of the world, dedicated his life to the civilizing of the Romans. He was certainly one of the great physicists of the West, although that science had already been cultivated for thousands of years in the Orient. On the authority of Livius, Numa was of most venerable appearance. His person was regarded as sacred, and he communed with the gods. All this sounds very unscientific, but it must be remembered that in those days science was as yet undivorced from sacred orders, and hence education was a balanced instruction in both physical and spiritual values. Numa built a laboratory, equipping it with the instruments theretofore unknown to the Romans and, possibly instructed by the same Eastern sages who later imparted their learning to Alexander, began experimenting with electricity. From the fragments that have descended to us, it seems that he must have constructed some kind of battery, for he captured Jupiter Elysius in bottles and could control the lightning by creating it at will. Salvertes is of the opinion that, before Franklin discovered his refined electricity, Numa had experimented with it most successfully. See Isis Unveiled. The prince, Tullus Hostilius, is said to have discovered the secret books placed in a hidden recess before Numa's death, and resolved to experiment with the electrical god. As the result of some mistake, due to his imperfect knowledge, the lightning which he generated destroyed him. He was struck by the heavenly fire, his body glowed with flame, and he fell dead in his laboratory amidst his instruments. Tullus Hostilius is the first known martyr in the field of electrical research. There is no real difference, then, between the premises of science and magic. Only the savants of today dislike to recognize their kinship with the necromancers of antiquity. Democritus, the laughing philosopher, is seldom associated with metaphysics and magic, yet how shall we deny that he was schooled in the theurgic arts? His education was derived from the hierophants of Persia, Egypt, Ethiopia, and India, among whom he lived, and throughout his entire life he was devoted to the Pythagorean mysteries. Modern science rejoices in the thought that this great atomist shared their contempt for supernatural phenomena. Their joy is short-lived, however, for Democritus did not reject miracles, but, admitting their existence, maintained that they were natural rather than supernatural. To him, miracle working was an aspect of science, and hence it was the duty of science to explain the miraculous and not to condemn it. Democritus defined a miracle as an effect whose cause was unknown, but which was necessarily equal to the effect which it produced. Having been initiated, he knew that transcendental magic depends upon and does not violate natural law, as the uninformed claim. Democritus practiced divination, wrote prophecies, foretold events, presumably from the stars, astrology being the principal science of the Persians, and used charms and magical formulae for purposes of healing. Imagine the consternation in the world of letters when it is more universally known that Democritus, the father of experimental science, attributed numerous virtues to the left front foot of a chameleon, and actually believed, see Pliny, that unguents could be prepared which would render the person using them invisible. Democritus had learned of atoms from Leucippus, and the knowledge passed from him to Epicurus. Then Lucretius took hold of it, and at last, after many vicissitudes, John Dalton, father of modern atomism, made his astonishing discovery. Lucretius also declared that there were the seeds, semina, of things evil to life, which fly about and cause disease and death. But Louis Pasteur and others are credited with discoveries in the field of infection, which would have been impossible had not the ancient Greeks and Egyptians paved the royal road to learning. In the Great Chronicle of Belgium, which was published in 1480, Albertus Magnus is referred to as Magnus in Magia, Major in Philosophia, Maximus in Theologia. This encomium is discounted practically in toto by Charles Singer, who writes, "Even the most learned of medieval writers, even Albertus Magnus himself, knew so piteously little compared to a modern scholar, that it is possible, with sufficient application, to trace all the sources of his information, see from magic to science. However, let us examine the piteously little knowledge possessed by the magician of Ratisbon to discover, if possible, in what measure he deserves the contumely of modern scholars. Albertus Magnus was a philosopher, a mystic, astrologer, alchemist, and transcendental magician, 5 branches of learning beyond the pale of his present recognition. If it is indeed possible to trace all the sources of his information, we would recommend that a logical point to begin would be the matter of his famous android. It is related of Albertus that he made an entire man of brass, putting together its limbs under various constellations, and occupying no less than 30 years in its formation. This man would answer all sorts of questions, and even employed by its maker as a domestic. But what is more extraordinary, this machine is said to have become, at length, so garrulous that Thomas Aquinas, being a pupil of Albertus, and finding himself perpetually disturbed in his abstrusest speculations by its uncontrollable loquacity, in a rage caught up a hammer and beat it to pieces. See Lives of the Necromancers. Such an automaton might provide a thrill even in this age of chronic ennui. But Albertus was more than a creator of automata. He possessed other magical powers equally intriguing. The Trithema Chronica describes how Albertus received and entertained William, Earl of Holland. The conjurer monk spread a magnificent repast in his monastery garden, but it was midwinter and the tables were laid in the snow. As the earl and his courtiers seated themselves, Albertus waved his arm. Suddenly the snow disappeared, and they felt not only the softness of spring, but even the parterre was filled with the most odoriferous flowers. The birds, as in summer, flew about or sung their most delightful notes, and the trees appeared in blossom. See the lives of the alchemistical philosophers. The banquet over, the vision disappeared as it had come, and the nobles were forced to hasten indoors because of the severity of the weather. It seems, then, that this learned Dominican friar enjoyed a form of knowledge not available to the savants of this age. Of course, it will be denied that Albertus was favored with such gifts, but denial neither proves nor disproves anything. It might prove profitable, however, to be less contemptuous and examine this piteously little which Albertus knew. For there are still many secrets of nature that retire abashed at the irreverent approach of the materialistic scientist. Then there is Paracelsus, whom Dana styles the Luther of physicians. Garrison also pays the great Aurelius several notable compliments. Paracelsus, he says, was the precursor of chemical pharmacology and therapeutics, and the most original medical thinker of the 16th century. Bas has compared reading Paracelsus to delving in a mine. We are in a strange world of mystic principles, macrocosms and microcosms, archae and arcana, enlivened by gnomes, sylvans, spirits, and salamanders. Yet, the author of all this high-flown verbiage, the actual Paracelsus, was a capable physician and surgeon. Garrison further notes that Paracelsus was the first to establish a correlation between cretinism and endemic goiter, was far ahead of his time in noting the geographic differences of disease, was almost an asepsist between Mondeville and Lister, and introduced mineral baths. Should we not examine carefully the philosophical background of this man who, in the words of Ferguson, revolutionized medicine, and who, according to Thomas Thompson, freed medical men from 5 centuries of bondage to worn-out precedents? Paracelsus confounded the professors of Basley by publicly burning the books of Galen and Avicenna. As an introduction to his lecture course, "My accusers," he exclaims, "complain that I have not entered the temple of knowledge through the legitimate door." But which one is the truly legitimate door, Galenus and Avicenna, or nature? I have entered through the door of nature. Her light, and not the lamp of an apothecary's shop, has illuminated my way. Paracelsus, the Hermetist and the mystic, the original thinker who gained his knowledge not from long-coated pedagogues, but from dervishes in Constantinople, witches, gypsies, and sorcerers, who invoked spirits, captured the rays of celestial bodies in dew, of whom it is said that he cured the incurable, gave sight to the blind, cleansed the leper, and even raised the dead, and whose memory could turn aside a plague. This magician is the father of chemical medicine. We cannot do better than to summarize the achievements of Paracelsus in the words of Lessing. Those who imagine that the medicine of Paracelsus is a system of superstitions which we have fortunately outgrown, will, if they once learn to know its principles, be surprised to find that it is based on a superior kind of knowledge which we have not yet attained, but into which we may hope to grow. See Paracelsus. No survey of the contributions of occultism to science would be complete without the achievements of Jan Baptista van Helmont, whom Dana dignifies with the appellation the Descartes of medicine. This noble Belgian mystic, disciple of the divine Paracelsus, was the founder of the atero-chemical school, according to Garrison. He was the first to recognize the physiologic importance of ferments and gases, Garrison, and was the inventor of the term gas, Stillman. It has been said of Van Helmont that no chemist has been cited more frequently or with greater respect. While still in his early 30s, he retired to an old castle near Brussels, where he remained retired and almost unknown to his neighbors until his death in the 67th year of his age. The good name of Van Helmont has suffered to some extent from the modern penchant for criticism depreciatory of earlier writers. He is accused of having pirated his opinions. The fact, however, appears to be that Van Helmont's discoveries have been shamefully pirated by pretenders who came after him. The materialistic scientist is here confronted with an interesting dilemma. The man who first taught the chemistry of the human body and stated the true purpose of chemistry to be the preparation of medicines for the treatment of disease was an alchemist, horrible dictu. In his treatise De Vitae Aeterna, Van Helmont gives the following amazing testimony. I have seen and I have touched the philosopher's stone more than once. The color of it was like saffron in powder, but heavy and shining like pounded glass. I had once given me the 4th part of a grain. I call a grain that which takes 600 to make an ounce. I made projection with this 4th part of a grain, wrapped in paper, upon 8 ounces of quicksilver heated in a crucible. The result of the projection was 8 ounces lacking 11 grains of the most pure gold, so that according to Van Helmont, 1 grain of the philosopher's stone could transmute 19,156 grains of quicksilver. It is interesting to note that Van Helmont never professed to have ever actually prepared the philosopher's stone, but gained his knowledge of its appearance and power from alchemists whom he contacted during his years of research. The place of Sir Francis Bacon, Lord Verulam, in the world of science is too thoroughly established to require defense. He has been called the great instaurator of all knowledge, accomplishing in himself the advancement of a whole generation and achieving in a few short years a restatement of the entire premise of learning. There is evidence that Bacon was strongly influenced and stimulated by the writings of Paracelsus. Far from being a materialist, he was profoundly impressed with the reality of spiritual values, a point well summarized by him in his treatise on atheism, wherein he writes, "A little philosophy inclineth man's mind to atheism, but depth in philosophy bringeth men's minds about to religion." Bacon's confession of faith testifies that to this truly great thinker, the purpose of knowledge was to discover a legitimate reason for hope, to demonstrate the integrity of faith, so that the intellect shall not attribute so much to secondary causes that it ignores first cause. Lord Bacon broke with the scholasticism when he was 16 years old, and from that time devoted his mind to the Instaurato Magno, the great restitution of learning. He was self-taught, acknowledging no master among the pedants of his day. To those laboring under the delusion that the memorization of other men's opinions is the beginning of education, we submit a short extract from the life of Bacon by his faithful friend, William Raleigh. I have been induced to think that, if there were a beam of knowledge derived from God upon any man in these modern times, it was upon him. For though he was a great reader of books, yet he had not his knowledge from books, but from some grounds and notions from within himself. Our great author, then, is convicted of mysticism by his nearest friend, and if more proof is needed that Bacon was at heart a Hermetist and a Rosicrucian, dedicated to a secret science, the New Atlantis is more than sufficient. Imagine the great master of inductive reasoning, the man whose criteria of fact were observation and experimentation, delivering himself of the following scientific heresy. In the traditions of astrology, the natures and dispositions of men are not without truth distinguished from the predominances of the planets, as that some are by nature made and proportioned for contemplation, others for matters civil, others for war, others for advancement, others for arts, others for a changeable course of life. See the advancement of learning. Roger Bacon, the Franciscan monk, preceded the illustrious Sir Francis by nearly 400 years, but even the briefest consideration of science would be incomplete without some reference to the extraordinary measure of his genius. Garrison thus surveys the field of his erudition. Roger Bacon was a comparative philologist, mathematician, astronomer, physicist, physical geographer, chemist, and physician. He reformed the calendar, did much for the theory of lenses and vision, anticipated spectacles, the telescope, gunpowder, diving bells, locomotives, and flying machines, and was a forerunner of inductive and experimental science. In all this, when Europe was in a period of intellectual obscurity, he is actually believed to have contrived a machine to rise in the air and convey a chariot more speedily than if drawn by horses. He knew the art of putting statues in motion and drawing articulate sounds from a head of brass. Recent evidence has come to light that he actually assembled a microscope and was the first to investigate microorganisms. Of course, Roger Bacon was an alchemist. He performed miracles, and of his medical writings which have survived the vandalism of time, the most important are concerned with astrology in its application to critical days and the use of planetary antipathies and sympathies in healing. Another scholastic heresiarch, shall we say? Then there was Galen, one of the very greatest and most creative biologists of all times. See Charles Singer, who did not find spiritual mysteries antagonistic to physical learning. Nor can we overlook Ptolemy, chief of the cosmographers and geographers, and the founder of the principles of modern astrology. To continue this line of thought further would be to merit the accusation of tautology. The great Vesalius maintained that the study of the human soul was within the province of anatomy, and Robert Fludd, considered by De Quincey to have been the immediate father of Freemasonry and the chief of the philosophers by fire, was addicted to the earlier theories concerning the microcosm and the macrocosm. Copernicus and Galileo derived their theories from the metaphysical speculations of Pythagoras. Kepler and Tycho Brahe accepted the scientific integrity of astrology, as did Flamsteed, the astronomer royal and the founder of the Greenwich Observatory. Halley, of comet fame, once criticized astrology in the presence of Sir Isaac Newton, the discoverer of the law of gravitation, who immediately rose to the defense of the ancient science by saying, "I have studied the subject, Mr. Halley. You have not." From the foregoing, it would seem a reasonable conclusion that such major contributions to the body of scientific learning as chemistry, pharmacology, mathematics, astronomy, music, biology, physics, anatomy, bacteriology, atomism, electricity, and botany came from idealists and mystics. Yes, even from magicians and astrologers. However, if transcendentalism is not admitted to be a distinct aid to the intellectual supremacy of these pioneers of learning, it cannot be shown, on the other hand, that it proved detrimental to them. It should mean something, or is it only a coincidence that the forerunners of science in nearly all its departments were the devotees of the theurgic and mystic arts? Hippocrates, the eldest of the sons of Asclepius, was the first physician. His Just Gerandum oath is still the most impressive document in medical ethics. In this work, the duties of Asclepiades are defined for all occasions and all ages. Hippocrates was also the author of other aphorismata, equally impressive, if not equally revered, by the medical fraternity. The following is representative. The man who is ignorant of the science of astrology deserves the name of fool rather than that of physician.